what I love.
Hello, I'm Scruffy, and today I have to gush about the music and sounds of Outer Wilds. It's tied with Pikmin 2 for my favorite game of all time, as it's just an absolute treat for your senses, your inner detective, and your soul. And for me, that's largely because Outer Wilds is my favorite type of game, a big open world that focuses on real-time discovery. There are no loading zones or invisible barriers. The entire solar system of the game is all functioning in real time as you explore, and thus the only barriers on what you can do in the game are your own knowledge and your skill with rocket boosters. But it also dips into my other favorite type of game, those arcade sorts of quick games where you can finish the game loop a couple times per play session, and the name of the game is resetting it to do it a little better next time. In Outer Wilds, that's been rendered diegetic by having a canonical time loop in this dying solar system, and it's up to your plucky Hearthian protagonist to figure out why that's happening. Now, real quick, this particular video will not spoil the ending of the game or its DLC, but since the most important part of playing Outer Wilds is your knowledge of its world and mechanics, I highly recommend you experience Outer Wilds before you watch this video. So, to solve the mystery of this time loop, you fly out from your home planet of Timber Hearth to all sorts of sites of interest in the solar system, in a mix of part far-future archaeology and part space camping. That's such a fun premise to approach with music and sound effects, and it's palpable that the music in Outer Wilds has been finely woven into that premise since its conception, which is a result of the game's composer, Andrew Prahlow, having virtually the game's entire development cycle to explore what music would fit best. That is rarely the case, by the way. Most often, video game music development starts later and has a much smaller time budget than 7 years. So it certainly stands to reason that Andrew's music here would gel particularly well with the game. He was able to craft a homespun folk language for the familiar camping aspect of the game, and unique, otherworldly textures for the alien mystery aspect. And by that I mean both alien cultures, who have their own means of communication with music to match, and outer space itself, which deserves its own sounds, or lack thereof. Now that we have this kind of mapped out, let's explore this soundscape in more detail, beginning with the homey, rough-hewn music of the Hearthians. From the outset of your first time on Timber Hearth, you'll see the sun rise over the treetops in this forested crater of a village. And as it does, you'll get your first taste of what we can imagine to be Hearthian music. Acoustic guitar, banjo, electric guitar, and a touch of synthesizers and subtle loop pedal textures, playing a rich, easygoing tune. Nothing too elaborate or in-your-face, just feels like a group of performers playing a well-traveled tune that they love. And a neat little adaptive detail, it lasts for exactly the span of your village's daytime, precisely from sunrise to sunset, and it will pick up wherever it should be in the day if you leave the village and come back. As this charming tune and the day's sunlight invigorate the earthy colors of the village around you, you get the impression that Hearthians are very audial communicators. They've got those long ears, they speak to you and you speak back, and you soon encounter Nice with their banjo, somehow not out of place even in an extraterrestrial forest village. And Nice tells you they made the instruments that each astronaut in the Outer Wilds Ventures program wields. And to track down these astronauts, you can hear those instruments as transmissions through your signal scope. Actually, they put it more eloquently. If you feel like company, you can always pull out your signal scope and track them down. The Hearthians value company greatly, and so even when they're planets apart, in some of the contrastingly loneliest possible settings, the Outer Wilds Ventures members still play an ensemble tune, letting each other know that they're there. And using your signal scope, you can hear that these instrumental parts are always in sync with each other. So if the orbits of multiple planets align to your view, you get to hear more of the ensemble together. As for the theme they play, it's this simple, easy-to-play melody shared between Rybeck on banjo and Esker whistling, with a harmony from Gabbro's flute and Feldspar's harmonica, and percussion from Chert's drums. It has a 4-chord progression that feels comfortable but never quite resolved, so the song can continue playing as a campfire song would, for many verses, all night. This melody not only plays over your signal scope to keep tabs on the Outer Wilds campers, it also becomes the main theme of the game, and eases its way into other settings like the music during space travel in your ship. Therefore, it's a leitmotif, and I interpret it to represent not only the Hearthians, but to literally encode the Hearthians into history. You know, one big facet of audio communication is that we remember things audially. So, if you have an easy melody shared among friends, then you have a reminder of those friends, no matter how far you get from them. Okay, I'm already getting sentimental, so let's see how this musical approach contrasts from that of the Nomai, the much more advanced, yet long-gone alien race who become the main subject of your archaeological studies. Since the Nomai have been wiped out for a long time, you don't get any audio communication with them. But it seems as though they might not have had any to begin with. They kept all their records through writing, and communicated with each other largely through their spiraling, branching writing system. In fact, kinda seems like they used that writing system even during times that, to us, would call for more urgency than writing something down, such as the explorers within the volatile Interloper. And according to the website of Ian Jacobson, one of Outer Wilds' concept artists, the Nomai's skeleton was given small, three-fingered hands to help justify why their technology was based on sight. So it's possible that the Nomai never used sounds to communicate, only encoding things in written language. So what's the sound of that? Andrew Prahlow scored the ruins of 2 Nomai villages with a long, ominous electroacoustic drone in E, flecked with glimmers of looping electric guitar ambience, and glued together with somber improvisations on an old, kind of broken-sounding upright piano. And for scenes where you find actual Nomai remains near the sources of their tragic fate, the drone gets even more ominous in C, with a tape looping what sounds like a distant wailing choir. Quite a far cry from the warm, inviting sounds of the Hearthians. This is more of a lament for the Nomai than the music of the Nomai. But there's something interesting about all the instruments employed here. Looping instructions. A synthesized droning sound can continue for as long as the source is powered or the space reverberates it. A loop pedal or a tape can similarly continue to play their fragments of sound for as long as the equipment lasts. And an upright piano, although it normally requires manual input, can be set to play its tune automatically and perpetually if it's a player piano, winding its wheel of instructions ad infinitum until enough wear slows it down. All these instruments only require initial instructions and then can set themselves looping their music without further input, potentially even outlasting whoever wrote the instructions. This setup reminds me of the music of William Basinski, specifically the disintegration loops. Basinski had a collection of found sound recordings and delay systems on magnetic tapes, but as he tried to convert them to digital sounds after decades of owning them, he found the tape itself had deteriorated. So he recorded the tapes playing out, looping their sounds as they deteriorated further and further. There's a similar melancholia that comes out through a looping sound like that, indiscriminately following its instructions and playing to utter exhaustion. The Nomai just happen to have tapes that can repeat their messages on a much larger timescale. And in that way, the music represents how Nomai history was encoded and how we communicate with the echo of the Nomai. Hearthians have the luxury of speaking across space, while Nomai had the happy circumstance of spiraling their communication through time. Now, speaking of space and time, what did I mean by making the void of space-time a major character like the Nomai and the Hearthians in the soundtrack? Well, space-time is not only the setting for the game, it often becomes the player's antagonist. Outer space is the thing keeping the solar system's secrets far away and the journey hazardous. So firstly, might I commend the sound effects in the game for really helping to characterize space that way. I loved hearing the different levels of impact from footsteps or from your ship. They help you understand more about gravity, and they really highlight your mistakes as you learn to fly or spacewalk. I loved being on Giant's Deep and listening as a whirlwind launched the island below my feet up into low orbit. Just a great delta between a loud, tumultuous atmosphere and the sudden silence of the void. The same happens on Brittle Hollow, when you hear the planet crumbling around you and then fall into the central black hole and end up far off on the opposite side of the solar system. The void of space becomes particularly spooky in these cases, when you're out of your ship and floating about. No more cheery spaceflight music out there. Deliberately, all you're allowed to hear is your own breathing in your helmet, and all exterior sounds are muffled to get you feeling not only alone, but way out of your league. And that generally goes even when music scores the various other places of interest you explore in Outer Wilds. While each tune has its unique take on how it feels to be standing in that location, they all tend to stay slow, droning, reflective, and to some degree lamenting or even preying on that alone in the universe feeling. With one exception that I'll get to. At their core, these are simply scoring particular locations. But these locations are imbued with increasingly complicated scientific phenomena, and thus they really feel like somewhere this humble little Hearthian shouldn't be, but for their unending pursuit of the truth. The Sun Station, for example, features waves of very bright, biting synth chords that orchestrate the heat that must be plaguing the station. In between those waves, we can hear familiar sine wave-ish drones and reverse piano notes, letting us know that this is another Nomai structure. I like to imagine the whole piece moves so slowly and reverb blends together the harmonies so much to portray the music as almost melting in the intense heat. It's not somewhere for Hearthians. It's barely somewhere the Nomai should have been. The depths of Giant's Deep's ocean, on the other hand, feature cool drones wet with reverb, a Hearthian banjo exulting in the respite from the storms above, and a pinging synth that almost sounds like a Morse code transmission to hint at the wealth of information stored deep within. This track functions a bit more like a reward for players who navigated the storms of Giant's Deep and discovered the method to get past the pelagic currents. It's a moment to collect yourself between that hurdle and the next, and, in my view, to admire that you've made it there in the first place. Meanwhile, Dark Bramble has a piece that goes even slower, a chorus of ominous drones that very gradually slide up or down in pitch, scoring the recursive size of space in there, and the inherent danger you put yourself in the deeper you go. Some of these drones crescendo until clipping distortion starts crushing them into noise, and sometimes the entire piece sounds like it's slightly accelerating or decelerating, as if being played on an old tape. There's no melody, only the emptiness of a musical void as murky as the fog in Dark Bramble. And interestingly, unlike the Sun Station or Giant's Deep, this piece only plays when you're in your ship. If you exit your ship inside Dark Bramble, you get the same unnerving silence as in outer space, perhaps to let you know it's hardly worth exiting your ship here in the first place. And my favorite location in the game, the Quantum Moon, also uses ominous vocal-sounding drones, but their changes in pitch are less deliberate to highlight multiplicity and uncertainty. A shorter, less layered version of this track constitutes the radio signal that all quantum shards emit, so you're familiar with the sound by the time you successfully land here. But getting surrounded by this chorus, hearing extended, more distant, and more proximate voices in this mix, you definitely pick up that those quantum shards originated from this more complete quantum body. I could listen to this one in particular for a long while. It gives me the vibes of Gheorghe Ligeti's Requiem. But the one exception I mentioned to these lonely, contemplative, or ominous drones of music would be The Search, which plays when you're exploring a still-functioning site of Nomai technology, such as the orbital probe cannon, that cracks a great deal of the mystery about the Eye of the Universe. In contrast to all the ambient music and even to the other Nomai-centric music we've heard, this track has driving percussion that almost resembles cranking machine parts, and the synths we hear are very strict to that beat. And so is the piano, which is not the worse for wear upright we heard before. This sounds like a healthy baby grand. To me, That all means you're stepping into a preserved history here. You're getting to witness science the same way the Nomai did when they were alive. And so, this untarnished rhythm is you feeling the same revitalized spirit that the Nomai felt when they successfully tracked down more about the eye of the universe. It's the closest you get to being at one with the Nomai, except perhaps for exchanging languages with an actual living Nomai, the quantum-preserved Solanum, my beloved. And those are my thoughts on the core of Outer Wilds' music. I'm enthralled with how well it works for the setting, how well it captures these people's marks on history, and how cozy or how small it can choose to make you feel. I haven't covered all the music in the game, and I'll definitely have more to talk about. But for now, there seem to be signs that this video is coming to an end. Because no matter where you are in the game's solar system, you'll start to hear something of a requiem in itself, descending chords from A minor to signal and to grieve over the imminent death of the sun. It's a good alert to get what you wanted to do in this loop done, or it's a good atmosphere for just watching the universe go through its final act. Either way, I agree with the decision to override the soundtrack with this based on the time you've spent. Because time will keep marching on, and it's up to us to leave some kind of mark on it. Before I go, I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon, who help keep my video making process sustainable. If you'd like to support my work directly and get perks like your credit here, seeing videos early, a vote on what music I arrange, and more behind-the-scenes content, you can visit my Patreon link in this video's description. And with that, I'm Scruffy, and thank you very much for watching.